What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka New York Prepper. I wanted to talk to you guys about World War III and one possible scenario for World War III. And, I've talked about it a lot on my live streams, but I wanted to put it into a video because I have a lot of people that watch my channel and they don't watch a lot of my live streams. So I wanted to just put this idea into a video to give you guys something to think about and factor into your prepping. So in this video, I'm going to talk about one possible way that an invasion of the United States could happen. And, before I get into that, I just want to say that obviously would be very unlikely anytime in the near future for any country to try to invade the U.S. So I just want to get that out there because I know there's going to be a lot of, people out there that are going to tell me that, that would never happen. And, and that's common sense. It's common sense that probably won't happen anytime soon, but it could happen in the future. We never know. You never know how things can happen. So it's always good to think about all the different possibilities. And plus, it's a Friday night and we're heading into a weekend. So I thought I would do something kind of fun, not something so serious. I get burned out talking about the election and the pandemic and the economy. It burns me out. I want to kind of get away from that for a little while and get into some other things, So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know if you like it, and I'll do more related to World War III and stuff like this. So, all right. So what I want to say is basically, this is what I think would happen if Russia or China were to try to invade the U.S., either by themselves or together. So let's say Russia by themselves or China by themselves. I don't think that China would attack us by themselves, not anytime soon. I think it's highly likely that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and pretty much any other country that doesn't like us would all join up together to attack the United States at once. It wouldn't just be Russia by themselves or China by themselves. They would get together and use their combined militaries to try to overpower us, basically. And that's really the only way that they would have a chance against our military. Because one-on-one, let's say U.S. versus China or U.S. versus Russia, they wouldn't be able to beat us, But when they join together, that's where they really have a lot of power, and that's something to think about. So, so here's one scenario, and again, it's just one scenario that I've thought of, and this seems to be the most plausible way that any kind of invasion of the U.S. would ever happen. So obviously, before there's any kind of an invasion of the U.S., obviously we had movies like Red Dawn. In Red Dawn, the U.S. gets invaded by a combination of Russia, I think China, and North Korea, depending on which Red Dawn, because there was a remake in 2012, which had a combination of China, Russia, and North Korea, I believe. So, I kind of want to give you guys my thoughts on how it would happen if there ever were an invasion of the U.S. and, tactically how that would actually look like. And, again, I'm not like a 4-star military general. So this is just me using my common sense and knowledge of different things. So what I think what would happen, is first of all, whoever would try to invade us, they're not just going to invade us when we're at our strongest point. They're going to try to weaken us first. It's just like in boxing. Any of you guys that are fighters or into boxing or fighting sports, you don't just go right in for a strong punch. You usually soften up your opponent with jabs first. You hit them with a few jabs, and then you follow up with a right hand or a cross or a strong hook okay, but you soften up your opponent with jabs first, okay? And I think the same thing would happen if there was ever an invasion of the U.S., is that, they would try to throw some jabs at us first to soften us up before they try to make their big push to take us over and enslave our population or take our resources or impose communism, whatever their goals are. So what I think they would do is two things. Number one is they would try to eliminate our nuclear triad and take out our satellites. That would be the first thing that they would do. They would have to simultaneously do multiple things at once, and it would have to work, perfectly in order to soften us up to prepare us for an invasion. So that would be a combination of taking out our satellites, taking out our nuclear triad, and taking out a lot of the major military infrastructure, and then also maybe dropping an EMP on top of that. Those three things would be the critical ones that I would say would all have to go well for them to be able to soften us up enough to where they could actually invade and take us over and control us. So taking out our triad, the way that would work is, they would go after our missile silos in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, Colorado. We have all of our ground-based missiles are in North Dakota, in the Minot area, Minot Air Force Base, up here in north central Dakota, in Great Falls, Montana, and also in Wyoming. There's some missile fields as well, and also in northern Colorado. Okay, that's where NORAD is. Okay, so they would have to strike all those missile silos and hit most of them. Otherwise, we would be able to retaliate against them. Any kind of invasion, they would have to eliminate our nuclear capabilities. All right. Then that would, increase their odds tenfold. So they would go after those missile silos, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. That's where, 70% of our ground-based missile silos are located, in those areas. So they would have to target those areas, take them out. Then they would also have to go after submarine bases, Trident missile bases, like in Seattle. There's a Trident missile base. I'm sorry, not a Trident missile base, but a submarine base. Where all the Ohio class subs that launch the Trident missiles. If you don't know what that means, an Ohio class sub is the largest submarine that we have in the U.S., and they're specifically made for launching missiles. They used to be made for launching Tomahawk missiles, but they reconfigured them. I'm sorry. They reconfigured some of them from doing nuclear into Tomahawk. I'm sorry. Okay, so you have Ohio class subs, and those subs are specifically made to launch nukes from them. Okay, that's why they have to be so big. Typically, one of these Ohio class subs, they have a nuclear engine, so they could stay in the ocean indefinitely. They don't have to refuel. They can carry, up to 18 nuclear missiles. Okay, 18 actual missiles, and each one of those missiles can have multiple warheads on them. So it really depends on what kind of warheads they want to use, whether they want to have like one big warhead or 20 or 30 small warheads that target different areas. But they can carry up to 18 missiles, and they launch them by surfacing, and then they open up like a little hatch, and it's pretty much just they launch the missiles right out of the sub. That's one of the most critical aspects of our nuclear triad, because should our ground-based missiles get taken out, that's where the submarines would come into play, because they would be able to retaliate. And it's obviously impossible for Russia or China to know where all of our subs are, because they're constantly circling the globe. They're hundreds of meters underwater. there's no way that they can pinpoint them. What they could do is they could go after the submarine base. There's one in the Puget Sound. There's a few other sub bases. They would have to go after the B-1 bombers, because the B-1s, the B-2s, I'm sorry, not B-1, B-2 stealth bombers, okay, which soon to be B-21, I think. The stealth bombers are long-range bombers that are designed to drop a nuclear warhead. All right, that's their main job. That's what they were built for. They could take one of those B-2 stealth bombers, put a warhead on it, or multiple warheads, and they could fly all the way into, they could fly over Moscow undetected and drop a bomb on Moscow if they wanted to. All right, that's what they're made for. So they would have to eliminate all three of those things, or most of those things. They're not going to be able to eliminate every sub, every Ohio class sub, or every B-2 bomber base, or every nuclear missile that we have underground. But they can eliminate 50 to 75% of them if they have good intel, and they know where our stuff is located. So that would be the first thing that they would do. And a lot of you guys are saying, well, that would not happen. We would intercept the missiles. Well, again, we don't have that many missile interceptors. We may only have up to 100 nuclear missile interceptors, and those interceptors it's not like, you have to understand that a nuclear missile is flying at 20 times the speed of sound. Okay. It's 20 times faster than a rifle bullet. Okay. So it's like shooting one bullet at another bullet in the middle of the air. And those bullets are going 20 times faster than the speed of sound. It's not as simple as it seems, okay? It looks, when you're looking at a missile flying in space, it looks like it's going very slow, but in fact, it's going 20 times the speed of sound, okay? So a lot can go wrong. On top of that, nuclear missiles, it's not like Russia and China don't know that we have missile interceptors, so they've created countermeasures to fool our missile interceptors. They can deploy balloons, mylar balloons that are inflated, hot air balloons that are inflated, and they can deploy those to throw off the heat signature of the missile and have the interceptor attack those mylar balloons. They can deploy chaff. There's all kinds of different things they can do to evade those interceptors. And again, we only have up to 100 of those. Okay, so that's not really that much. All right, if they launched a volley of 600 missiles or 1,000 missiles, and again, those missiles are not going to be, like huge warheads. They're going to be smaller warheads that are designed to take out specific targets, like a nuclear missile silo, a specific bunker, because there's hundreds of nuclear missile silos in North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. So each little they're like tactical nukes, basically, smaller, much smaller than the Hiroshima bomb. And they would just target those specific silos. All right. That would be hard to intercept. It wouldn't be that easy. All right. And so that would be the first thing that would have to go right. The next thing would have to be, they would have to take out our communications, which is critical, because then they would have dominance over, air. They would have air dominance, because we would lose GPS capabilities and things like that. So they would they would have to successfully take out some of our satellites as well, military satellites and things like that. All right. They would have to take that down. On top of that, an EMP would probably be highly likely. They would probably want to wipe out the power before they invade. That just makes the most logical sense. And so those would be the three things that would have to happen first. And then I think what would happen next after those things were to happen. So let's say they launch, 1,000 tactical nukes. They wipe out most of our silos. They take out some of our sub bases, Ohio class subs. They take out some of the strategic bomber bases. Maybe they also hit some other types of military bases that are very important, like the headquarters of global air, the Air Force Global Strike Program and STRATCOM and some of those other areas that are critical, NORAD, okay, strategically important bases that are essential for communications and stuff like that. They would maybe take some of those out. After they did that, the way that they would approach an invasion, in my opinion, is that the first thing they would do is they would not cross the ocean, in my opinion, all right? Because historically, the United States, our main advantage is that we have all this water around us. We have the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific, and that protects us from any kind of invasion, because if China wants to attack us, or North Korea, if they wanted to invade, it's a huge buffer. You have thousands of miles of deep ocean water. Getting all the equipment across the ocean is not possible. Okay. They would, no invading force with the technology that we have now would be able to move enough military assets across a giant body of water like the Pacific or the Atlantic and then land on our beaches and try to attack us that way. That's highly unlikely and probably would never happen that way, because we just simply, there's no technology, there's no ships that are big enough to bring enough equipment, armor, tanks, things like that. And not just the tanks and the armor, which weigh a lot. One tank weighs, over 100 tons. And then you have to have, you're going to need to have hundreds of tanks if you're going to invade the U.S. And, so how are you going to transport all that equipment? And then on top of that, logistics, all those tanks need fuel. They need maintenance. It's not just about getting the troops over. That's easy. It's easy to get the armor and the troops over, but then you need a whole support system behind that in order to sustain those troops and the vehicles and everything else. And by the time, China or Russia would be halfway across the ocean, we would see them and we would just sink them, So that's not likely to happen. What I think would happen most likely is they would try to land their forces in Canada and also in Mexico. They would attack us basically from the north and from the south. Okay. And what's interesting is that actually Russia in recent years has gotten really friendly with Venezuela. And they even have a submarine base in Venezuela. And they also have a submarine base in Cuba. Okay. So, I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if that's part of a long-term strategy that Russia has, that they're trying to gain a foothold in South America for a possible invasion in the future. I don't know, but that's up to you to decide. But that's definitely a possibility, because if you think about it, okay, if Russia can bring their troops across the ocean here down into Venezuela, okay, and they can start to build up their forces in Venezuela, that's going to keep them safe. They're not going to be attacked when they're trying to cross the ocean into Venezuela, and they can stage all their armor and all their troops and logistics, everything else that they need, support structures. They could stage everything in Venezuela, and once they have enough equipment, they can move through Central America, and then they could be right on our border here. Okay. So Venezuela would be a very good staging area for Russia to move a lot of their forces before an invasion, and then they could make the push through Central America and then on through the southern border. All right. So I think what they would do is they would squeeze us from the north and from the south. All right. First thing they would probably do, in my opinion, is I think Russia would cross the ocean. They would cross the Arctic. They would not invade Alaska right away, all right, in my opinion, because it's too much land. There's too many troops here. It's well defended. What they would do, in my opinion, is go after Canada first, okay? And what they would do is conquer the entire northern two-thirds, or most of Canada, because most of Canadian population is right along the U.S. border. So 80% of Canada is just a giant unpopulated area, and Russia could come across the Arctic. they could forget about Alaska and just go right into Canada, and they could conquer the entire, 80% of Canada. Okay. And once they get into Canada, it's going to be very difficult for Canada to fight off the Russians, because the Russians are much more powerful. They have more military. All right. Canada would not be able to fight back. And by the time the United States would even think about getting involved, the U.S. would probably come to the conclusion that, it's not worth it for us to fight in Canada, because if we overextend our forces trying to defend Canadian terrain and we lose those forces, that would leave us vulnerable, that would leave us wide open. So the U.S. would likely not really venture too far into Canada to try to push the Russians out. They would just stay close to the border and fortify the border, all right? Because if they went up into Canada and they sustained losses, that would leave them wide open. So then what Russia would do, in my opinion, is, they would control this area, most of Canada. They probably wouldn't make a push for the Canadian cities, because that's not their goal. Their goal is to conquer all of this terrain. And then once they conquer this terrain, they can start to move their forces across the Arctic, armor, logistics. They can also take control of the oil fields in Alberta, and that could be their supply of oil. All right. And they're not going to really push into the cities yet. Okay. They're going to conquer that unpopulated area, and the U.S. is going to think to themselves, U.S. and NATO are not going to be willing to lose men and equipment to, kick Russia out of an unpopulated area. Now, if Russia started attacking Calgary or Vancouver or Winnipeg, then, you would see the U.S. getting involved. But if Russia stays to the northern part of Canada, the unpopulated regions, I think NATO would just let it go and fortify their borders, rather than trying to push Russia out of this huge unpopulated area. It just wouldn't be worth it for them to do that. So once Russia would have all this terrain, then they would move everything over, and then, they would have the oil there, and then they could set up first thing that they would probably do is set up some kind of anti-ballistic missile defense system to protect the assets that they move over, which would be like S-400s. They would set up S-400s. Once they set up S-400s, it pretty much, there's no way that we could take them out, because S-400s are a very advanced anti-missile and anti-aircraft surface-to-air missile system. So that would pretty much guarantee that they could hold on to that terrain indefinitely. And so at that point, they would be right on our northern border here pretty much. And then if they continue to cross through South America in Venezuela or some of these other countries, they can move through Central America, and then they could build up their forces in Mexico. We know that Mexico's not a strong ally of the U.S. They would likely be bribed easily by the Chinese or the Russians. They would easily side with them. So it's highly likely that they would do that. They would allow Russia and China to land their forces in Mexico or move through their borders. And then at that point, you have a situation where we have troops in Canada, Russian and Chinese troops in Canada, Russian and Chinese troops in Mexico. And then at that point, they could push over the border and squeeze us. And again, their main goal is not going to be to seize control of cities and population centers. Initially, if Russia and China were to push across from Canada and up from Mexico, they would go after the military infrastructure first and wipe out our military. And then they would, go after cities and things like that. Now, would Russia and China be able to easily conquer the U.S.? No. Even if they were successful at conquering Canada and getting into Mexico without trouble and having all their forces amassed in Canada and Mexico, the U.S. has a very diverse topography. It's a huge land, all right? There's all kinds of difficult terrain to negotiate. You have huge mountains. The Rocky Mountains are, a huge barrier for armored vehicles and tanks and things like that. It's going to be very difficult for them to move equipment across the country, because the U.S. is so diverse. You have deserts, you have high mountains, you have boggy areas that, armored vehicles could get stuck in. So it wouldn't be easy, even if they crossed from Canada and Mexico into the U.S. It wouldn't be easy. All right, they would have a hard time. But I think eventually, if we were already hit by an EMP, if they already took out our nuclear triad, if they took out some of our satellites, I think that they would have a very good chance at, they may not conquer the entire country, but they're going to conquer and control certain areas that are the most important, like they may take control of a lot of the farms in the Midwest, because that's all flat land. And they would maybe try to rush in with all their tanks and all their armored vehicles and take control of the plain states, North Dakota, all the way down to Oklahoma. All right, they would try to seize control of the breadbasket, because that's all flat terrain. It's very easy for tanks to cross, just like Hitler crossed into Poland. Poland is mostly flat and a lot of farms and things like that. So it's very easy for tanks, blitzkrieg. I think they would try to go after the breadbasket. I think they would try to also control some of the major cities as much as they could. And I think they would obviously try to weaken the military as much as possible. Now, I think also if it got to the point where if it got really bad and the military realizes that they're not going to be able to win, they would have to withdraw and go underground into bunkers. They're not just going to continue to fight if they know that Russia is on the Canadian border and China's in the Mexican border and they have millions of troops on either side. Our military is not just going to fight a suicidal battle. So at that point, they're going to make a tactical retreat, and they would likely go underground, go into bases. There's tons of underground bases across the U.S. A lot of soldiers would probably at that point join forces with locals and try to create a guerrilla warfare type units across the U.S. You would have, U.S. Army soldiers training local civilian populations, in guerrilla warfare to be able to fight against the Russians and the Chinese. So I think you would have most of the military leadership would go underground in areas where they couldn't be found. And then what would be left would be the guerrilla forces, the locals, the civilians, combined with the military advisors that would be training the civilians that would be fighting against the Russians and the Chinese. That's how I think it would play out. If there ever were to be an invasion of the U.S. Again, I don't think it's likely, but I think it's worth to discuss and put it out there for you guys, my thoughts on everything and how I think it could go down. It's not guaranteed to happen this way. It just seems the most logical way. Crossing the oceans is unlikely. I think they would come through Canada and through Mexico. Like I said, Russia could conquer Canada in 2 weeks. There's nothing that Canada could do to stop Russia. If Russia wanted to take over, 2/3 of Canada, they're not going to be able to stop Russia, believe me. So, and then Mexico, obviously, they're not going to be able to stop the Chinese if the Chinese want to march through Mexico and mass up troops on our southern border. So it's just something to think about, guys. So I hope you factor that into your prepping. And Red Dawn is a really good movie. Highly recommend you guys watch both of them, the original one and then also the new one with Chris Hemsworth, 2012. A lot of guys didn't like it that much, but I actually thought it was good because it gave a different scenario. It actually involved an EMP where the U.S. was hit with an EMP, and the North Korean paratroopers landed on the West Coast, and then the Russians invaded the East Coast, and they were working their way from both coasts across the country. And then the only thing that was left, there was no military left. It was just pockets of guerrilla fighters across the U.S. that were fighting against the Russians and the North Koreans. So, all right, guys. So I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button. Let me know what you thought about it. What are your thoughts? How would an invasion look like? And if you like this video, let me know so I can make more like this. All right, guys. So as always, take care. God bless. And don't forget the 3 Ps: prepare, practice, and persevere.